of whoever in Lugansk and Donetsk people. That's what I think.
That's the elephant in the room, you could say, the Russian role, and it often strikes me as it must be fascinating or perhaps maddening to be in the discussions with, for example, NATO and Russia or EU and Russia, where they sit down and attempt to try and begin the process of conflict resolution, and at some point early on they must say, well, you must withdraw your troops, and they say, well, we don't have any troops. And where does the conversation go from there? Until there's it's a bit like you know, with the Alcoholics Anonymous, and the person has to stand up and say, you know, I'm an alcoholic. And in this case, I think, you know, we have Vladimir Putin has to stand up and say, you know, I'm Vladimir Putin, and I have a problem with hybrid war. You know, he has to acknowledge that he's in the mix before they could, you know, until he acknowledges or Russia acknowledges their status, it's almost impossible to imagine how the situation can be resolved, because as it is...
If I may, that was a very important issue you have just touched upon. But I remember 1.5 years ago in American Senate and Congress, personally, I've proved with the evidence of Russian aggression to both bipartisan majority of the Senate and Congress with the hard evidences and proofs, here they are. I mean Russian aggressors, their tanks, their artillery, those losses, hostages. That means for us, for Ukraine, we have a position. And then, when you have position, when you have proofs, when you have clear understanding what is going on in your country and who is aggressor, we have to talk to international community. France, Germany, the United States, but with proofs. Well, this not is like just mentioned. Sitting people are talking like...
No, but this is the diplomatic issue now that the...
Okay, Peter, let's take the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and then discard them, because it never happens. The best case scenario, you have a popular uprising in Donetsk and Lugansk. They throw over those people who are governing them with guns, and they come back to Ukraine. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, they get incorporated into Russian Federation, one way or another.
Oh, yeah.
So for them, the worst case scenario is probably things staying the way they are. Being incorporated into the Russian Federation for them would probably be better than how things are right now for them. I mean, it's not something that Ukraine would necessarily wish for, but the worst case scenario is how it is.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think that it's so evident that Russia doesn't plan at any stage to incorporate those two republics into Russia. If you have any even thoughts about this, you don't completely take back to Russia full.
Don't forget, it depends on the Russian leader.
Oh, yes.
Today is one, and we don't know who's going to be tomorrow.
You think that the next one is going to be better? I think the next one might even be much worse.
So then you get incorporated.
No, because it's much better like this. Incorporated, it means that you need to take care of those people. The infrastructure is destroyed on such a level that I'm sure whether Putin...
But they took it to Russia in many ways.
They took full factories.
Absolutely.
To Russia.
Agree.
Why to do this if you have any thoughts to... And what to do with the Donbass? Look what they did with their coal industry in the Russian part of Donbass.
True.
They just closed it down. So I think that my worst case scenario is to continue like it is today for another 10, 20, 30 years. You know, when people think, yeah, it needs to be settled very fast. I mean, the Cyprus issue started in '74, and we are now in 2016, and it is not solved. Look at Prednistrovia, look at Abkhazia. Unfortunately, those conflicts can last very, very long, with the difference that this is not a frozen conflict, because each day people get injured, each day people die. Each day people get kidnapped, because we have a little piece of Stalinism also there, so it's very cool now to if you have a neighbor that annoys you, to make a small phone call and say, I think my neighbor is pro-Ukrainian. So there were clear cases of people who just were taken to the basement because the neighbor decides that he's pro-Ukrainian. So I think the worst case scenario is not an incorporation. The worst case scenario is to continue as it is today for a long time. This is...
On the Ukrainian side, though, there were posters up inviting people also to call up the SBU if they were if they suspected their neighbors of being pro-Russian or pro-separatist. So it's on both sides. And I'm not sure that that kind of attitude from Ukraine, even if there are people who argue that it's necessary for security reasons, I don't think it encourages people in the parts of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts which are controlled by Ukraine to feel very sympathetic to the Ukrainian state. In Kramatorsk, Mariupol, places like that, if the Ukrainian state is inviting them to denounce their neighbors and that kind of thing.
Jason, don't you get an impression that Ukrainian side, Kiev, is very slow in reacting?
I think exactly right. I think the Kiev side is very slow. And one of the chief mistakes is not providing enough evidence to the international community. They're allowing this conflict to be forgotten. I think that when you look at what's going on in Washington, it's not as much of a conversation about Ukraine. What's next for it? People aren't talking as much about this in Brussels as they were before. And I think it's really key at this moment that Ukraine should be providing more evidence and keeping fresh in people's minds that this is not a Ukrainian conflict. This is Russian aggression against Ukraine ordered by Vladimir Putin. And as long as we keep up that tactic and we keep pushing this and providing fresh evidence every week, every day, all the time, and making sure people don't forget, I think that's what Ukraine should be doing right now. But the government is not doing that.
I think Ukraine needs to be doing that within Ukraine as well. I sometimes get the impression, talking to sort of ordinary Ukrainians, that they themselves have forgotten that this is Russian aggression and it's not the fault of the people who are in the Donbass. You hear people on a day-to-day basis in Kiev and elsewhere fed up of what's going on in the east and sometimes inclined to blame the people of Donetsk and Lugansk for what happened to them. I think Ukrainians themselves really need to keep it in mind all the time that in the last independent survey that was done in the Donbass before it became impossible to carry out surveys, 70% of people in Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts said they wanted to stay part of Ukraine. They weren't interested in independence or joining Russia. This was already after Crimea. And Ukrainians themselves need to keep that in mind all the time.
Yeah, I agree. And for us, Savik, I think for Ukraine, we have to actually get and have our Ukrainian scenario for both territories, Donetsk and Lugansk, separately occupied.
Is there a scenario? Is there a Ukrainian scenario?
What I think is important for this scenario, for the government, President himself, and who is now those people who are responsible for national security, first, preparatory stage or preparatory work, humanitarian, let's say freedom of press, mass media people, whatever, to travel, to be both sides, plus medical care, and to prepare the space for the
in Ukraine, they like certain words to pronounce them. They don't like to implement their meaning.
That's
reforms, roadmap. It sounds beautiful.
No, not about all this stuff. Real things.
I have a better one. Ministry of Information. It is amazing. In summer, we didn't manage to move fast enough, so we had to spend the night in Kurakhova. And I, as usual, woke up and switched on the TV, and I saw the face of Pushilin. Pushilin, who is one of the big leaders of... so we are in Kurakhova, a territorium that is controlled by Ukraine since 2014. And 2 years after that, they still don't know. It was the best hotel that they have in Kurakhova. Even there, they don't manage. We had 3 Russian channels and 2 DNR channels. Plot, and I forgot the name of the second one.
So-called Donetsk Republic, yeah?
Incredible.
Still.
We speak about Ukrainian-controlled territory, and what are we talking about?
Right, yeah.
But why is there no Russian language channel in Ukrainian-controlled territory to speak to people who prefer to watch TV in Russian in these areas?
Disaster.
You are asking a question that has no, has no answer.
But if I may, Savik, not to interrupt you, but because now the president himself and his minister of information concentrated to what? To stop SHUSTER live broadcasting in Ukraine. Then there is no enough, let's say, time and efforts to stop all this disaster, informational disaster in eastern Ukraine. This is my response of Ukrainian citizen and Ukrainian, let's say, NGO representative.
Well, this goes back to the corruption. That's the fundamental problem here. And really at the root of everything else. Attacking the free press is just indicative of the larger corruption in this government.
That's true.
And their inability to prosecute this war is also related directly to the corruption that's found here.
Absolutely. We'll break for a couple of minutes. Welcome to Schuster Live from Kiev. So, Valentin, let's talk a little bit about this roadmap, because very few people, I don't understand really what this government is doing. I don't. I understand that the Minsk agreements, which were imposed upon Ukraine by Russian force, Ilovaisk and Debaltsevo, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, don't work. But Mr. Hollande and Ms. Merkel are facing their own problems, their own future elections, and they're going to pay attention less and less to this process. As far as the new American president is concerned, we don't know. So it's all in Ukrainian hands now.
Absolutely. I agree, Savik. But let's start talking. When you're going through hell, keep going. This is not my words, Mr. Churchill, please. But anyway, let's keep going. I've just briefly mentioned that we need Ukrainian scenario, not roadmap, not talking, not blah, blah, blah on these issues, but Ukrainian plan, international community, international support. And Mr. Trump, yes, is crucial. His position and his, let's say, support to our peace plan for our territory. Territorial sovereignty, yes. In Mr. Trump platform, Republican platform in the United States, they clearly supported us, talking that they'll never recognize, Mr. Trump himself, Crimea annexation. True? Yes, that's true. That's another story why Mr. President...
I do believe that the United States will never recognize. They never recognized the occupation of the Baltic states.
Yeah.
But it took Mr. Gorbachev to come to power.
Let us not be Mr. Gorbachev. Sorry. Let's keep going. So what I think is important, preparatory stage, what I've briefly mentioned, humanitarian, medical care, and let's treat those people, you're absolutely right, under the temporary occupation like our citizens. Let's not cut off them, let's treat them. They are, let's say, we are ready to provide them, whatever, let's do that. But this is only the preparatory. Then I think realistic plan is to start real demilitarization. Meter by meter, region by region, city by city. Mr. Evgen Marchuk, by the way, I think elaborated a very good formula to withdraw from both sides at least artillery, at least mortars and other, let's say, weaponry killing civilians. Let's start with the stop killing civilians. I think this is the best ever initiative of Ukrainian whatever government, president, and other, let's say, officials responsible. Then, deoccupation. What does it mean, deoccupation? That's the second stage after demilitarization, to bring back peaceful life for whom? For local communities there in Donetsk and Lugansk. Same time, demanding, insisting to get back our citizens who were forced to leave their, let's say, homes and apartments in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. I really think that the best ally ever for us, for Ukrainian government, to really stop war in Donetsk and Lugansk regions are those people who are suffering and still suffering because of being replaced by this war and Russian aggression. Then maybe why not local elections, maybe other issues with international communities like OSCE and other, let's say, institutions there to bring back normal life. In common words, let's find scenario to substitute Kalashnikov with any other agenda for local communities. Business, yes. Medical care, yes. Whatever, guys and ladies, do whatever you want, but not stop shooting, stop killing. Get from us, from Ukrainian government, whatever we can provide you with, but stop killing. Stop the actually
Is it possible to talk that way to Zakharchenko, who is the head of so-called DNR and LNR, Platnitsky? Is it possible to find them a common language?
I don't think that it makes even sense to talk to them because they have nothing to decide.
Oh, yeah.
I think the question is how you can bring our big neighbor friend to give this order, because it is clear